Welcome to this first module in a series, Healing with coMra-Therapy. My name is Garrett Murren, and I'm going to be your host as we go through this series. Now, the first thing I want to convey when it comes to coMra-Therapy is that it is a new and exciting step in the evolution of holistic medicine. And I'm saying this because what we have, on the one hand, we have the science and technology, and on the other hand, we have the healing arts. And through this series, we're going to show how coMra-Therapy marries them together in a very practical way that you can make use of in your own life, in your family, in your friends, as well as in your practice with your clients. And this is what this module series is going to be about. And so now, the first thing I want to touch on is the technological aspect of coMra-Therapy. And this was brought about during the last 20th century in the evolution of the physics of light, the physics of sound, and the physics of magnetic fields, and their intersection with the understanding of biological processes within living organisms. And now this in itself marks a very exciting development, because what it signifies is this move away from the old mechanistic model of the body, the universe, and how everything works, into a much more holistic model, and hence holistic medicine, holistic healing. All of this word holism keeps coming up more and more now. But that's not really, that's exciting in itself, but the essence of coMra-Therapy comes about from the age-old healing arts of how best to support the body in its process of self-regeneration. And so now, for this first module, what we're going to do, we're going to take this central concept of coMra-Therapy and flesh it out, because it sets the stage for all the modules to follow. So, let's go. The central concept of coMra-Therapy is very straightforward. It's cooperation with the body's intelligence to support its ability to self-regenerate. So, using the Coherent multi-radiances, we're providing non-invasive support directly to the diseased cells. With this support, the stimulated cells are now internally reorganizing themselves. Now, this isn't anything out of the ordinary. This is an intelligent and completely natural process that occurs in the body every moment. What we're doing is merely supporting this process, because the cells are going to be struggling due to either maybe some acute injury, long-term stressor, some sort of toxic load, whatever it is. We're going to provide the support to the cells so they can reorganize themselves. And as their function and structure gets back to a healthy state, their collective units, what I mean by that is the tissues they comprise, and those tissues, organs, and those organs, body systems, those are also going to become regenerated and healthy once again. And I'm going to say it again, the central concept of coMra-Therapy. And remember earlier we were talking about the healing arts, and I was talking about marrying the healing arts and the new technology. So, cooperation with the body's intelligence to support its ability to self-regenerate. And as you can see from this concept is quite different from where medicine and biology are today. So what are the differences? Where did they come from? Let's listen to Dr. Rupert Sheldrake now and see what he has to say.
Since the late 19th century, science has been conducted under the aspect of a belief system or worldview, which is essentially that of materialism, philosophical materialism. And these sciences are now wholly owned subsidiaries of the materialist worldview. I think that as we break out of it, the sciences will be regenerated. What I do in my book, The Science Delusion, which is called Science Set Free in the United States, is take the 10 dogmas or assumptions of science and turn them into questions. seeing how well they stand up if you look at them scientifically. None of them stand up very well, but essentially the 10 dogmas which are the default worldview of most educated people all over the world are first that nature is mechanical or machine-like. The universe is like a machine, animals and plants are like machines, we're like machines. In fact, we are machines. We're lumbering robots, in Richard Dawkins' vivid phrase, with brains that are genetically programmed computers. Second, matter is unconscious. The whole universe is made up of unconscious matter. There's no consciousness in stars, in galaxies, in planets, in animals, in plants, and there ought not to be any in us either, if this theory is true. So a lot of the philosophy of mind over the last 100 years is trying to prove that we're not really conscious at all. So the matter's unconscious, then the laws of nature are fixed. This is dogma 3. The laws of nature are the same now as they were at the time of the Big Bang, and they'll be the same forever. Not just the laws, but the constants of nature are fixed, which is why they are called constants. Dogma 4, the total amount of matter and energy is always the same. It never changes in total quantity, except at the moment of the Big Bang, when it all sprang into existence from nowhere in a single instant. The 5th dogma is that nature is purposeless. There are no purposes in all nature, and the evolutionary process has no purpose or direction. Dogma 6, biological heredity is material. Everything you inherit is in your genes, or in epigenetic modifications of the genes, or in cytoplasmic inheritance. It's material. Dogma 7, memories are stored inside your brain as material traces. Somehow everything you remember is in your brain in modified nerve endings, phosphorylated proteins. No one knows how it works, but nevertheless, almost everyone in the scientific world believes it must be in the brain. Dogma 8, your mind is inside your head. All your consciousness is the activity of your brain and nothing more. Dogma 9, which follows from dogma 8, psychic phenomena like telepathy are impossible. Your thoughts and intentions cannot have any effect at a distance because your mind's inside your head. Therefore, all the apparent evidence for telepathy and other psychic phenomena is illusory. People believe these things happen, but it's just because they don't know enough about statistics, or they're deceived by coincidences, or it's wishful thinking. And dogma 10, mechanistic medicine is the only kind that really works. That's why governments only fund research into mechanistic medicine and ignore complementary and alternative therapies. Those can't possibly really work because they're not mechanistic. They may appear to work because people would have got better anyway, or because of the placebo effect. But the only kind that really works is mechanistic medicine. Well, this is the default worldview, which is held by almost all educated people all over the world. It's the basis of the educational system, the National Health Service, the Medical Research Council, governments, and it's just the default worldview of educated people. But I think every one of these dogmas is very, very questionable. And when you look at it, they fall apart.
I trust you enjoyed Dr. Sheldrake's talk. I know I sure did. And incidentally, this was especially, I enjoyed it in light of, they banned this talk when he did it. People were very upset that he said these things, and he actually banned the talk. And of course, people got in an uproar because this is supposed to be, you know, information from TED Talks. And so, of course, they re-released it with an apology. But anyway, if you get a chance, please look at it. The whole video, that is. And if we come back to what he's pointing out, you know, we have all these many dogmas that are affecting us all in our society today. And this is especially pertinent with respect to science and medicine. Now, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because obviously there's been amazing, huge advances throughout all of these discoveries that have been made. And the latest major scientific shift that began back in the 1800s is what brought this about. And it was this move, this swing from one polarity, which we had before, that said, very spiritual view of life in the world and a reverence for the universe, to the exact opposite of this materialistic, mechanistic understanding. And that mechanistic understanding said, look, we don't need all this spirit stuff anymore, because look, the universe, the body, is just like this big giant clock. We can explain it all. And this is through simple mechanics. And what that points to is we're in charge here. And so we're going to do what we need to do to make this universe work for us. So before this time, we had these ancient healing arts. And I talked about those in the video before. And this new scientific materialistic view. But we're not trying to argue which one is more correct, because we need to realize that they in fact reflect different levels of understanding as it pertains to the universe and the body and health and disease. There's the structure of the body together with the pathology and the chemistry. There's the energy and the formative forces that are behind this facade of matter, and quantum physics goes into that a lot. And finally, there's the overarching intelligence that ultimately is guiding the matter and the energy. Now, we have research and practice at each of these levels, and that's brought about enormous knowledge. And it's time to take that, instead of selecting this knowledge and rejecting this one, we need to adopt a truly holistic approach. And that approach is to be based on the unity of the structure, the energy, and the intelligence. And in doing this, we're going to need to discriminate between, and note I'm saying discriminate between, not discriminate against. We need to discriminate between the old unscientific dogmas in science and religion and other areas, but we're focused on these here, and the truths behind them. What we got here is an animation circa 1926, and this is showing man as some sort of like industrial complex or palace. And I mean, even though it looks exaggerated, this is really the mechanistic view. The heart is viewed as a pump that's simply pumping blood. The teeth and digestion in the mouth are this strictly mechanical process. And this whole mechanistic view is this endless pathways of mechanical transport, the molecules being digested and the chemical transformations of them as one chemical is added to another. Even though this is an exaggeration, at the end of the day, this is the mechanistic model. And so when you look at drugs and surgery, these are born straight out of that mechanistic worldview. They have their basis in the manipulation of the body. And these manipulations are aimed at either one, suppressing symptoms, or the other is reversing the so-called pathological processes that are believed, because of that very same mechanistic worldview, to be the cause of the symptoms. So, in other words, disease in the body is combated based on the ideology of the mechanistic worldview. Now, there's no doubt that drugs and surgery have been amazing in this century and have definitely proved themselves to be life extending. And notice I said life extending in terms of emergency medicine. However, they perform poorly when it comes to long-term health. And this is because they've got their basis in that manipulation of the body. Take, for example, the action of bisphosphonate drugs. These are designed to act against osteoporosis. And this is a condition when the bones are gradually losing their density, their strength, and they're becoming prone to breaking. So according to the current mechanistic understanding, osteoporosis is caused by an imbalance between the activity of the osteoblasts, which are the cells that create new bone tissue, and the osteoclasts, and these are the cells that take away the old bone tissue. So they do the remodeling of the entire skeletal system. So in other words, the osteoclasts are going to take away more bone than the osteoblasts can create, and this is how osteoporosis is occurring. Never mind what's causing them to be out of balance. So bisphosphonate drugs are designed to kill the osteoclasts. But because you got this huge, vast complexity to bone regeneration process, long-term use of the bisphosphonate drugs is going to have a potential to cause bones to either grow irregularly and break, and even lead to the death of the bone tissue. In some cases, you get necrosis in the jaws, hip, knees, shoulder. So these are those unwanted side effects that do occur. So the challenge of any forceful manipulation is that it eventually, inevitably, is going to disturb this vast, complex, and fully interactive nature of any living form. If you look at this image, it's from an article published in a major scientific journal, Nature. What it's showing, there's 5,500 interconnections between 3,000 proteins here on this picture. This is what it represents. And this is in a worm. And we also need to point out this is what's been mapped out so far, meaning this is not all there is, it's just all they know about so far. And now on top of this, we can't forget that the human body is reported to have up to 30,000 types of proteins. And so if you look at just the interactions with the proteins, never mind how those proteins interact with other aspects of the body, that's a lot of interconnections. And so if you're going to manipulate one part of this web, this interconnected web that we're looking at here, that's going to affect every other part. And this is often going on with completely unpredictable results. So you're going to have to cope with the unwanted effects and so on as this complexity increases. And as you increase this invasiveness and complexity through these manipulations, in the long term what's going to happen is there's going to be this continuous escalation of widespread damage to the body. And what's going to follow on from this is this perpetually increasing cost of healthcare, and people, they're going to be way more dependent on that medical system. A system which, like that mechanistic model that created it, is in decline. It's not that we want to throw away this mechanistic model completely, nor are we trying to do away with the drugs and surgery that are born from it. But really, it's time for us to recognize its proper role as emergency medicine, as life-extending medicine. The complexity, the cost, the negative side effects, and most importantly, the dependency of people on this allopathic medical system makes it completely unsuitable as a long-term health care, as a long-term support for self-sufficiency, and as a model for well-being of every individual. To move in that direction, we need to move past this structure mechanics view and look into the energy and the era of quantum physics. This began over 85 years ago. At the turn of the last century, we began a move toward understanding the universe in terms of energy. Now, of course, I'm talking in scientific field. As Albert Einstein, he's famously said, concerning matter, we've all been wrong. What we call matter is energy whose vibration's been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. There is no matter. Now, how many people today live that reality? Obviously, we're still in this mechanistic worldview. So if you look at the most fruitful scientific advances of the 20th century, these are all made in this area of quantum physics, and everything followed on from here. But in medicine and biology, we're still stuck in trying to manipulate the structure of matter. But is it not obvious that the study of any organism from a purely structural point of view is going to be the same for living and dead? So how can we base our medicine for living beings only on the knowledge of mechanical and chemical structure? We're going to have to include energy flows that are animating all living organisms. So we've taken a look at this manipulative or allopathic approach to healing as part of that mechanistic model. But this is not the only thing that's been developed over time. And if you look at it, since the late last 19th century, there's this gradual trickling down of the idea that the body is actually highly responsive to energy. And this is especially in the form of light, sound, and magnetic phenomena. One of the first developments in this was at the turn of 1903. And what happened was there was a gentleman by the name of Finzen, and he was awarded the Nobel Prize. And he got this prize because he was treating people with skin conditions using light therapy, and especially blue light. And so this was a big step forward in the recognition that the body is actually very sensitive to energies, and they can have a very beneficial effect on the body. And then I'm going to jump ahead quite a lot. There's lots of other pieces in this, but just to touch on another one in the 60s, and I always find this really interesting because if you look at it, in the 60s we had the invention of lasers. Now, that word actually never existed until the 1960s because it's actually an acronym. And that acronym stands for Light Amplification by Stimulated Emission of Radiation. So when they discovered the lasers, what they started to do right away, they wanted to find out what's good and bad about them. So they started with some animal models, rats, and they put them in the lab and they cut them. Well, first they shaved them, then they cut them, and they shone the lasers on them, low level. Well, I'm sure they used all levels of lasers, but they used the low level to see if it was going to have a detrimental effect on them, cause cancer, these kind of things. And what they actually found is that it had the opposite effect. Instead of causing cancer, what it was doing was actually healing the wounds they were inflicting on the rats very quickly and also helping the hair grow back very fast. So step by step, we've seen the growth of energy and the body's sensitivity to it and the understanding of it. Not that anybody really understands it, but we'll get more into that later. And the growth of therapeutic use of these as well, such as light, lasers, magnetic fields, ultrasound. All of this has been developing throughout the last century. So then later in the last century, the 20th century, they actually came across, I'm not sure who discovered this, but they discovered that if you put a magnetic field in the presence of a laser, what'll happen is you'll actually get a better therapeutic outcome from the combination of the radiances. So this is the discovery of how not only is the body sensitive to energies, but if you combine the energies and use them with the body, it responds very well to those as well. And it turned out, like I said, that the two radiances together were more beneficial, more efficient than on their own. And this is actually developed since the early 90s and has become actually a standard of care in the Russian national healthcare system when it comes to a number of diseases. So, I mean, this is really good, but you got to think about it. It's taken almost a century. Just think about that. Almost a century for the scientific community, and especially here in the West, because when we had the Cold War, we didn't have any of this knowledge traveling between the East and the West to develop things further. And so we stayed in the mechanistic model a lot longer than we perhaps could have. But anyway, it's taken almost a century to fully acknowledge the profound role in energy with biological processes. Obviously, it's not fully acknowledged, but if you look at what's coming, everything is moving more and more toward energy medicine now. And so let's have a listen to Dr. Paul Rosch, and he's going to speak a little more on it.
Dr. Rosch is president of the American Institute of Stress, clinical professor of medicine and psychiatry at New York Medical College, and honorary vice president of the International Stress Management Association.
You think about all the advances made in diagnostics with MRIs, squid, PET scanning, positive emission tomography. These are all advances that have nothing to do with cholesterol or something in the blood. These are all advances that are based on energy medicine. And that is the medicine of the future, and certainly the future for stress research, in my opinion. Medicine is entering a new paradigm. Good health depends upon good communication between the constituency of an organism and with the external environment. The question is, how does communication take place in the body? Well, we know there are hardwired connections with the central nervous system, and we know that the endocrine system sends out little chemical messengers from the brain and hormones and so forth and so on. But we visualize communication in the body at a chemical molecular level. We visualize that these little things that circulate around find receptor sites on cell membranes, that they communicate like keys into a lock. But ultimately, that signal is transmitted by a weak electrical impulse to the interior of the cell. And ultimately, all communication in the body takes place at a physical atomic level rather than a chemical molecular one.
So Dr. Roche gave us a general idea about energy medicine, but let's look at a specific challenge of regenerating a damaged nervous system. So when neural stem cells were first developed, they were, there's a lot of hope and hype about it in terms of, we can put these stem cells in and just patch up any area damage, and et cetera, but that idea has run into a whole host of problems. And one of them is that these stem cells are not, they actually interact with the environment, so they actually need certain signals, they need information, and they have to be aware of their environment in order to grow. So if they don't get the information, if they're not aware of the environment, they're not going to grow. And so that means they don't work. And for a long time, it was assumed that they were only going to respond to special molecules, growth factors. If you look here at this picture, what you're going to see, this is an experiment with neural stem cells. And they're in petri dishes, they cultivate them like they do in the lab. And they did it for 7 days after adding growth factors to the one on the left. So that's cultivated for 7 days after the growth factors are added. And the other one on the right is they've shown infrared light onto the stem cells, no growth factors, and you can see here, it's very clear, the light was able to deliver the regenerative message and didn't use any growth factors, okay? That was in a neutral medium of some sort. So if you think about this, there was no invasive procedures, no molecules needed to be added, nothing needed to be changed about the cellular chemistry through addition of more molecules. This is a beautiful neuron sending out the neurites that are going to form living like brain-like network. Just think about this now. Up to this point, it was always assumed that you could only do this with other molecules. And this shows that the regenerative message, because that's what happens, you can do that with light. If you ever take the time and go on PubMed and you type in low-level laser therapy or light therapy, you're going to get thousands of hits. Because in the last several decades, what's been growing hugely is this research into energy medicine. And so while this has been going on, one of the big controversies or challenges that faces the leading experts is they're not able to figure out how a single therapy causes so many different healing effects. Because if you look at this double-blind clinical model, which I'm not going to give my opinion on, it looks at one mechanism, one pathology, one molecule, so it's very linear. But when you look at light therapy and all these energy therapies, it's not a linear healing effect. It's happening throughout the body, so you get different effects in different bodies. And these two leading experts, they were doing an editorial in photomedicine and laser surgery. And what they said, although there is much discussion of the uses of near-infrared photobiomodulation, there's very little on how it actually works, as far as explaining what really happens. We're basically left to resort to saying, light enters, then a miracle happens, and good things come out. And like I was saying, the reason for this is because it's not this linear process in the body where one, remember I showed that web. So whatever you do in the negative is going to have, repercussions throughout the web. But that's also conversely true, which is a beautiful thing. In the positive, whatever you do is also going to have, a ripple effect through the entire web, because the body has a very complicated, much more than I believe we'll ever understand, this non-linear response. And all living cells, they're going to have different responses to different forms of energy based on what's their needs. So what is it exactly that's going on here? Well, take for the example, immune response in the body. So there's an argument been going back and forth for a number of years on whether light therapy increases immune response or decreases immune response. And there's lots of solid evidence on either side. So how can this be? Because if you look at it, Bjordal, he did a review of 44 different animal studies, and he came to the conclusion that low-level laser therapy significantly reduces inflammation. And he said it's equally effective as NSAIDs. But then if you look at other studies, what they've found is that, and I mean they showed this very clearly, that it actually enhances the natural immune response. And this is in things such as infections to drug-resistant MRSA. After they do the light treatment, they notice that the natural immune response is increased. So what is it? How is it that the light treatment can both decrease chronic inflammation, and yet at the same time, in another case, it's going to increase acute inflammation after a bacterial infection? You see, according to the mechanistic worldview, a single invasive stimulus is only going to manipulate one specific pathological process, and it's going to take it toward a desired effect. And the hope is that the effect of this manipulation is going to result in more benefit than risk. Because remember, you got that big web, and you're going to push on one area and push it in a certain direction, and you're hoping that that doesn't mess everything else up too much. And this chain of cause and effect is fixed. So you're going to need to have a different therapeutic stimulus for any different desired effect that you want to get. But when it comes to non-invasive stimulus, such as low-level light, there is no one simple mechanistic pathway that's ever going to explain why light in one situation is going to promote a process and in another situation is going to decrease a process. Now, this is one of my favorite slides, and I want to point out a few things here. We've got to realize that the body is fully aware at all times of its current condition. Okay, just think about that. The body's fully aware. So if you look at this picture, you don't have to do a linear process. You need to do something that goes into the web and affects the whole web. And so if you look at a supportive, non-invasive stimulus, it can intelligently engage with the full scale of the body's adaptive and regenerative responses that are specific to that condition. In other words, the body's own intelligence makes the decisions of what, when, and where must be done in any one particular condition. So really, I mean, it's simple. You don't micromanage the body. You support the body's intelligence and the body does the job. I mean, who wants to try and figure out every detail of that enormous complexity involved in a specific pathological process? Instead, we find the key areas to support the body's intelligence and let the body look after itself. In other words, we've actually come face to face with the fact that all forms of life possess their own form of intelligence. And that intelligence guides a continuous, constant self-regeneration. Look at this finger. Okay, it's been damaged, and if you give the body the time, the body's got the ability to heal itself. This isn't anything new. I mean, obviously, everyone's totally familiar with it, and no one even questions it. But often, what we don't question, there's a lot too. If you look at medical science, the concept of homeostasis and adaptation, I mean, these form the very basis of our understanding of physiology and health. That regenerative process is always making the effort to get back to this point of dynamic balance, not a static balance, but a dynamic balance that's always adapting to the current situation. So why have we gotten so far away from this in this linear model? I was talking to a lady the other day, and she had, wrist pain, carpal tunnel. She was diagnosed with the carpal tunnel, and she said, quote unquote, they are going to operate. So I was saying, well, you could do some treatments with the delta. And she said, well, how's that going to help? I said, well, the body is always regenerating itself, and so you can help regenerate the cells, and the cells are there in that area of your wrist, etc., etc. And while I was saying this to her, she was looking at me completely dumbfounded, because she was like, well, how can this be the case? So, I'm sharing this example because it demonstrates really well how this mechanistic perception, this mechanistic model molds our perception of how things occur. I mean, to her, to take it to the lowest common denominator, the cartilage is like Teflon on a frying pan. It just wears out, so you go get a new frying pan. Unfortunately, the whole field of modern so-called regenerative medicine is totally distorted by this idea of replacing life with poor artificial imitations. And you can see that reflected by the people who are going to get those services. So you take, for example, osteoarthritis of the knee. This condition is said to generally worsen with age and is related to a loss of cartilage that protects the contact surfaces of the bone, So for decades, it was assumed that the knee osteoarthritis, is just, there's nothing you can do. So best thing to do is avoid running. And once the disease starts, anti-inflammatories. And if you're one of the people who's unlucky enough, eventually you're going to have to go get a knee replacement. I mean, it's not surprising if you look at how the body's seen as this really complicated machine that's always breaking down. So when I'm talking about this disconnect, on the one hand, nobody's questioning the cut on the finger. Nobody. Whilst on the other hand, they're looking at their knee and saying, well, I mean, it's just some mechanical part that's worn out and needs to be replaced. This is the disconnect. And this is why I was saying, sometimes it's important to question those seemingly unimportant things, because how can the finger regenerate but the knee can't? Why is this? Is it really true that the finger can regenerate itself but the knee can't? Obviously, it's not true, because we know the body can regenerate. We saw it in the example of the finger. And this can happen even under very demanding conditions. So you have this man in the picture and he's running. And if he's got knee osteoarthritis, the conventional model says that this should be getting worse right now because he's putting more strain and stress on the knees. But they did a study and they compared the knees of 45 long-distance runners to non-runners over a period of 21 years. That's a long time. So you think about someone who's running for 21 years as opposed to someone who's not. So the conventional logic on that is going to say the runner should be in worse shape And especially so because they're running so much distance. You know, they're pounding all those parts and they're just going to break down. However, the study showed that not only did the runners not exhibit more cartilage loss on x-rays, but they actually delayed by their running. They had delayed disability by 12 years. And this is an example, a very stark example, of the evidence of the ability of the body to regenerate. And this is even under a great demand, you know, with the pounding, with the running. And not only that, consider this, it's a very slow growing tissue. Cartilage doesn't grow very fast. So the point is here, this is not like some static tissue that does not regrow. I'll give you an example. I was at a laser physics conference and there was a medical doctor there giving a presentation. He's from Russia. And they were regrowing completely crushed discs. But the process took time. And most people wouldn't have the patience, insight, whatever you want to call it, to stick with the process. However, the ones who did, fantastic outcomes. And those were treatments with lasers and magnetic fields. So you see, the body can regenerate. Runners are a perfect example. Even slow-growing tissue. And of course, it's not just the knees. All parts of the body are constantly being regenerated. What you see here are samples of tissues with regenerative stem cells in them. And these are all highlighted by a special fluorescence. And these cells are traveling from their origin in the bone marrow to all kinds of different organs and tissues throughout the body. You can see that the skin, for example, and the inner lining of the small intestines have a very large number of these stem cells. On this table here, you can see the turnover rates for different types of tissues. For example, you look here, the stomach every 2 to 9 days, the lungs every 8 days. Other tissues obviously are regenerating much slower. And now, according to the latest research, even the central nervous system is regenerating itself. What's important here is that the process of regeneration is completely natural, it's occurring every single day, and it's governed by the body's intelligence. So to summarize, we have the body. And that body possesses an extremely advanced intelligence. And that intelligence governs its self-regeneration. So we're going to need to learn to cooperate with it in the healing process. Ancient wisdom says that intelligent cooperation is the very basis of manifested life. It's the glue which keeps everything together, and at the same time, it's that which makes possible the evolution. Now, to put that very simply, intelligence implies the ability to move toward what it is that we need in order to grow and flourish, and the ability to move away from whatever it is that's going to damage or harm or destroy us. Whilst cooperation means to strive together so that both parties win, you know, that win-win. And the bee, this is an excellent example of this, because what you see, it's going there, it's collecting the food for itself whilst pollinating the flower at the same time. But if you're in the mechanistic model, I mean, who really cares about the bee? If this is just some big machine in the mechanistic model, what do I care except for that it does the job I want it to do? In other words, it's not about this win-win or cooperation, it's just what I want for me. But then how does this fit in with life? How is that going to reflect in the relationships and our own health? If you look at nature, there's not going to be one part of nature that has a complete and utter disrespect for the other parts of it. It's all interacting in this very holistic way. So we need to make this principle of intelligent cooperation the very basis of healing and medicine. As we discussed, the development of energy medicine during the 20th century revealed several key ways how to provide healing stimuli in a completely non-invasive way. And then in 2009, when all these therapies were combined together in a fully, and here comes a very important term, and this term is going to come up again and again as we go forward on this course, and you'll hear it way beyond this course. It'll keep coming up in life. A fully coherent way. Through this, a new healing synergy emerged. So I'm just going to repeat that because I put this stuff in the middle. In 2009, when all these therapies were combined together in a fully coherent way, a new healing synergy emerged. This is a holistic approach and is now known as coherent multi-radiance therapy. In other words, coMra-Therapy. In coMra-Therapy, the needs of the disease cells are met at all three of those key levels of organization we talked about earlier with respect to living forms. We talked about the structure, the energy, and the intelligence. So we're going to go into all of this in greater detail in the following modules, but briefly speaking for now, we have the near-infrared laser and the magnetic field providing energetic stimulus for the entire healing process. The color LEDs are delivering a message of regeneration locally to the damaged tissues as well as systemically through the modulation of the nervous system. And finally, the ultrasound. I mean, all the radiances are working together, of course, for everything. But finally, the ultrasound for now provides a very gentle mechanical vibration that together with the support of the other radiances, this is going to greatly increase the speed of the cell's reorganization internally of rebuilding those structures. So coMra-Therapy is a concept, but how is it implemented? Well, if you look here, this is the Delta device. You're seeing a cross section. And so when you take laser, color LEDs, magnetic field, and ultrasound, and they're all working or irradiating the same volume of tissue at the same time, there's an emergent synergistic effect that comes about. And this is a very powerful healing effect. And the added benefit of this is while you have this very powerful healing effect, you can turn the intensity of the individual radiances down to a very low and completely safe level because of this synergy. So the coherent action is going to be achieved through the coherent modulation of the radiances, their geometric arrangements according to the role of each radiance, and also matching the energy levels of the radiances so they're not competing. To summarize, in this module we've discussed the central concept coMra-Therapy, and this is the most important point from this module: cooperation with the body's intelligence to support its own ability to self-regenerate. And this is central concept. It's going to set the stage for all the modules to follow on the scientific, clinical, and practical aspects of coMra-Therapy. So first of all, this module we had a look at breaking out of dogmas in science and medicine, specifically with respect to the shortfalls of approaching healing from a purely mechanistic worldview. Then we got into a brief introduction of energy medicine, and we talked about some of the developments in the 20th century that have led to the recognition of the intelligence of the body and how this intelligence is guiding this self-healing. And finally, we looked at coMra-Therapy and how it meets the needs of disease cells on all three of the key levels of organization within living forms: the structure, the energy, and the intelligence. Thank you.